Welcome to the Tribcast. I am Eleanor Klibanoff, women's health reporter here at the Texas Tribune. I am here with editor-in-chief and my co-host, Matthew Watkins.
Hello there.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah,
Doing okay.
doing okay.
We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, we're trying to keep the mood up, but we're also here with a politics reporter for now, James Barragán, also known as the Great Betrayer.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hello. We should say we're taping this on Friday. It is also James's last day at the Texas Tribune and his last day as co-host of the Tribcast.
And last day is friend to me and Eleanor.
True,
well.
exactly. Last day of person we look at, talk to, engage with at all. The shunning begins at 5 p.m. And then your happy hour begins at 5:30 p.m.
Yes.
So,
Okay, we'll wait till
awkward,
after
awkward
the
happy hour.
it's a brief shunning, yes. But no, for those who don't know, James is leaving the Tribune to go host Capitol Tonight at Spectrum News. We're very, very excited for you.
Thank you.
Glad you're staying in Austin and sad
Yes.
to lose you at the Tribune.
Yeah, I'm sad to go. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I would like to say happy birthday, belated birthday to you,
thank
because you missed the last Tribcast, so happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yes, very sad to be leaving the Texas Tribune. Had a great opportunity to hop over to Spectrum and be a host of Capitol Tonight, which is a program that I think we've all been on. We love and respect, and excited for new adventures and a new medium.
I feel like this is largely Matthew's fault because he said, "Hey, James, Eleanor, do a podcast. We'll put it on YouTube." James got a taste
They're like, this guy's
of
great on
fame.
video.
Yeah, they were like, "Oh my God." He was like, "I got to be on TV full time."
Gotta do it.
All right,
Yeah.
cut the camera off.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this was no one else can get a taste of fame.
We will miss you, James.
Yeah.
You've meant a lot to the Tribune. You've done amazing work, and we're really proud of you and excited that we'll still get to see you and watch you.
Thank you very much. I'll miss you guys, and I hope to have you guys on the show sometime.
Yeah, tell us a little bit. I mean, you've been at the Tribune a long time. What's a memory that stands out to you from your time here?
Favorite coworker?
Favorite coworker? Rank them.
Patrick Svitek.
Damn it.
Also dead to us.
Also dead to us. Yeah, you guys can join your little alumni council.
No, I mean, I don't know that I have one favorite memory. The treasure, as we say, is the friends you make along the way. My co-host Eleanor Klibanoff really has become a great friend of mine. Kate McGee, also a great friend. It's just a great group of people to work with. Very supportive newsroom. Like I said, I've done a lot of great work here. Had a lot of personal growth, and I'll miss you guys, and I'll miss the readers and the audience because they're so engaged and so vocal and so supportive. So I will miss that.
I think most of our readers know this, and listeners know this, but if they want to keep watching you, how will they be able to do that?
Yeah, you can watch on Spectrum TV on cable, and the show is on. It's called Capitol Tonight. If you don't know it, it's at 7:00 Monday through Friday, and I'll be there. I'll be doing a couple of weeks of training, doing just on the job reporting before taking over the anchor chair in early to mid-April.
How long have you been covering the Texas legislature?
Been covering the Texas legislature since 2017, so
Okay.
eight years.
And I know you're not leaving the Texas legislature, but 8 years, 4 sessions? 5 sessions? 5 sessions? Do you feel like you have any sense of have things changed in that time that you've been covering it? Have you seen any big shifts?
Yeah, I mean, we've had 4 different speakers in that time. So that's changed. We've talked a lot on the show about the rightward lurch that the Texas House has taken. When I first came in, it was under Joe Strauss, who was a much more moderate speaker. That was a bad word back then, but he certainly was a moderate. Stopped a lot of the kind of legislation that we're seeing now with bathroom bills. And I think it just speaks to how politics have moved in the state of Texas, to how the House is built and what bills are being taken up. But that's how life is. I mean, things change, but it's still one of the best state houses to cover, probably the best state house to cover in the country. So much consequential policy passes. And so I'm super excited to keep covering it and to keep following your guys' work, because you guys are the best at it.
Well, thank you. I agree. No, but turning now to the Texas legislature. I mean, this week I think we're just kind of gonna run through some of what we've seen happening. We've done a couple of episodes sort of focusing on specific issues, and while we've been doing that, a lot has happened at the Capitol. So things are really starting to fly now. The Senate is moving through its priorities. Sparks are flying in House committee hearings, and we're gonna really start seeing things move now pretty quickly. Matthew, talk about sort of where we are right now and what comes next.
I think as I've talked to people who work in the Capitol in recent days, the big thing that people are talking about is how calm and friendly it's been so far. I mean, we've had a few little moments of flare-ups, which we'll talk
get to.
But I think after this just incredibly tense primary season back in March, the Republican primary, a lot of members ousted, then a incredibly intense run up to the start of the session fighting over the House Speaker. We get Dustin Burrows. He is on the other side of the sort of, insurgent wing of the Republican Party, but he has taken a lot of effort to reach out to that wing, but even maybe more so Governor Abbott and Dan Patrick and try to kind of make peace. He's been, appearing on stage with Abbott on voucher meetings, rallies. He's been, working kind of in concert, or at least not in opposition to Dan Patrick in the Senate. And I think that there's a lot of optimism among people in the Senate and just around the legislature in general, at least on the Republican side, that maybe we can get through a sort of calm, peaceful legislative session instead of one that breaks down into fighting. The caveat is that it's, early March, and where we will really see that test is later in the session when things go through. But I mean, and there's lots of potential areas for it to blow up. There's still things that need to be ironed out in the voucher bill. I'm sure we'll talk about that. There's differing views on property taxes and everything like that. But so far, they seem at least willing to work with each other. The big three having their, weekly breakfasts, which wasn't happening last session. And to me, the big question is, will that stick?
Yeah, I think that it's still early on. I did have that realization like this week where I was just talking to somebody at the Capitol Cafe. Shout out Capitol Cafe. And they were like, wow, things are really getting going now. Like there's deadlines are coming up. Bill filing deadlines, I think, are next week. So things are getting going. At the same time, things haven't moved that much. I mean, we're talking about vouchers. We're talking about the Senate priorities flying out of the Senate, but that kind of is always regular
That's
stuff.
like almost administrative.
Yeah, and then the Senate voucher bill hasn't moved in the House. The House is moving its own thing. The committees are barely starting to meet and have their organizational meetings, so nobody can really say like, "Wow, my bill hasn't moved." Nobody's really has that anger in them yet. Everybody had nice committee appointments, so everybody's like in this feel-good era. But I think maybe over the next month or two, we're going to start seeing people outside of Representative Brian Harrison and his crew start getting upset if things don't start.
I just want to remark briefly, though, on what seems to be a talent of Dustin Burrows to make peace with folks, right? We all remember, or many of us, I'm sure, remember the scandal that brought down Speaker Bonin back in 2019, where he has a secret meeting with Michael Quinn Sullivan, the conservative activist, in which Burrows comes along with him, presents a sort of secret list of members of the Republican Party who MQS can target. Michael Quinn Sullivan secretly records this meeting. It goes out. It creates this big scandal. Burrows has to resign as Republican caucus chair, and Bonin ends up, losing his speakership over that. That, I think, you have to look at as a pretty low point for Burrows. He found a way to kind of bring himself back up into leadership, ended up winning the speaker's gavel, which is a pretty amazing thing just in and of itself. Then you have in the early session, the billionaire Alex Fairley talking about how he's going to essentially, signaling that he's going to go after people who vote for the sort of leadership wing of the GOP in the House Speaker's race. And then right before that vote, he puts out a statement that seems to kind of back away from that and almost give people permission to vote for Burrows, including Fairley's daughter who cast that vote. And now, again, at least it's early. I will again acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that every time we talk about it. But now he seems, at least for now, to be getting along with Dan Patrick. And that is a impressive skill by the speaker to that I think will help him accomplish things and just sort of like put the House in a different position than maybe it has seemed in recent years.
Do you think that to some extent just comes down to like personality, like who he is? Like, is he more of a peacemaker maybe than Dade Phelan, who was very much at odds? Or is it the political landscape that the sandbox they're in?
I'd be interested in hearing your opinion on that, James.
My thoughts are that he's not new to this; he's true to this, and so he.
Damn,
this
is how you get a TV contract, my guy.
No, I mean he is a very, very savvy political player. One thing that you didn't point out, Matthew, is that a couple of the people on his pledge list were people that he targeted in that 2019 scandal.
Right.
So you look at folks like Drew Darby, you look at folks like Stan Lambert, and say, man, what did this guy do? How did this guy talk to them? What has he done in the last couple of years to get those guys to come over to his side? That is remarkable for a politician to be able to do that turnaround. He's very savvy. We had a profile of him talking about how relentless he is. He's very organized. He doesn't just sit around and wait. And he also is, I wouldn't say he's the friendliest personality, but he is a very straight shooter. And when it's a no, he's going to tell you it's a no. When it's a yeah, he's going to tell you it's a yeah. But he doesn't stop at no. He's like, okay, it's a no now, but here are 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 things we can do to get it to a yes. And that's the kind of person that you need to be in the Capitol to get stuff done. And that's the person that he has shown to be.
Yeah, this is the kind of person you need to be, particularly in the speaker's chair, right? Because we always talk about how the lieutenant governor is perhaps the most powerful person in the state, particularly during a legislative session. And one of the reasons for that is structural, right? Because he's elected by the people, right? He's not elected by the other members of the Senate. So he can preside over it without worrying about angering enough lawmakers that they'll end up voting him out. And that's a much more comfortable and just a perch with more leverage than the House Speaker, who has to, we've seen this repeatedly over recent years, has to keep those members happy in order to keep them going. And he just seems to be pretty good at that.
You've got to serve two masters in serving the people who elect you to your House seat, but then also the other 149 members who are going to elect you as House Speaker. And he has this political talent for turning no's into yeses. And that's kind of what you need when you have that dynamic between the House and the Senate, which is often at odds, especially with the lieutenant governor like Dan Patrick, who is just, we've talked about this, we've used this phrase before, he rules with an iron fist. But Dennis Bonnen was also really good at this. He was wily, he was very smart. And it's because they had been chairman of big committees and had led had authored big bills, had known where the levers were to pull to make things go. And I think this is the dynamic that there is. And importantly, Lieutenant Governor Patrick respects that. He knows that he's a player. He knows that he can't just go above his head or bully him on Twitter. We haven't seen those kinds of messages. And so that is the dynamic that is playing out now. Of course, again, the caveat. What is going to be the relationship like in June?
Totally.
You can play this back.
I was going to say, right. We'll roll this right back. Yeah. No, certainly. I mean, I think we're seeing at least like friendlier. Also, there is a lot that they are in agreement on, right? Like it's easier to be friendly when you are all, or at least in, the big three are all saying we all want vouchers. We all want property tax cuts. We're going to have some conflict over how we do that, but like we're all kind of on the same page.
And people sleep on this, but Dustin Burrows is a very strong conservative. I mean, people will try to, in certain interests, will try to convince you that he is not. But I mean, I get emails from people in his district saying like, this guy is a dyed in the wool, like red as blood conservative. And that's why they get along. That's why they are in such agreement on these issues. Whereas again, going back to our earlier comment about when I started covering, it was Joe Strauss. he was not as conservative. He was a more traditional, like Reagan Republican, George Bush Republican.
Right.
These are much more socially conservative lawmakers, and that's why they get along.
Right. I mean, the gap between Joe Strauss and Dustin Burrows versus Dustin Burrows and, say, David Cook is, Strauss and Burrows much wider.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking about vouchers, we're not going to get into the
It's
whole
a segue.
That's what we call a segue in the biz. We've got all the big three. We're all agreeing on vouchers. Everybody's all so happy. James, where does that stand right now in this the warm up period?
I think it's when you're making pasta and like you got to let the water boil a little bit. That's where we're at right now.
Okay.
Because everybody is like, okay, this thing is moving. The Senate bill has passed the Senate. Now we got the House bill. Weirdly, like, tell me what your thoughts are on this, Matthew. But like, the education advocates are sort of kind of quiet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Jaden had a really great story about the Democrats, like top leaders on voucher stuff, sort of saying like, you guys are being too nice. Like,
Right.
if you need money, you
Come
need
out
more money.
swinging,
Yeah, come
right.
out swinging, right? And it's sort of a détente or a little bit of an under the radar kind of battle that they're fighting because they don't want to tick off the state officials who basically control their purse strings because they really desperately need the money. But also, it's like vouchers could really hurt their public schools.
Mhm.
And this is what they say, maybe not publicly, but they certainly say it privately to us, right? And so I think it's that part. But then and I think Republicans are pretty confident that it's going to pass. But then you're also seeing folks like Cody Harris and Brad Buckley getting booed on stage,
Mhm.
getting shouted down at their own town halls. I saw Carl Tepper isn't even doing a town hall. He's doing kind of a moderated radio appearance because there is starting to be some pressure and things are starting to the rubber is hitting the road, and so we're really getting to see like what the actual proposals look like, what impacts it's going to have, and I think the fight is just beginning.
Yeah, I think going back to the comment about the schools maybe not being fighting as much, I think that's an interesting observation, and it kind of goes back to something I've talked about on the podcast before, which is they successfully, quote unquote, successfully blocked vouchers last session, and what it got them was losing access to billions of dollars in additional state funding, about a dozen of their strongest supporters in the Republican Party losing their primary seats, and vouchers likely getting passed 2 years later anyways, right? And so I wonder, I haven't talked to anyone about this, but I wonder whether there's a sort of like, okay, this is probably going to happen. Let's stop this fight and let's focus on getting what we can get, which is basically that since 2019, when the state passed, a major school finance overhaul, and really significantly boosted up school funding, that funding has not kept up with inflation since then. And if you watch from 2020, where it kind of hit a high watermark, until now, if you're talking in real dollars and 2025 dollars accounting for inflation, the school funding has dropped about $10 billion from the state during that time. And so these schools, and it's important to note that happened during really, really financially healthy times for the state, where there were unprecedented levels of of state surpluses and funds, right? And so if I'm a school official, I'm thinking, we're not in great shape during really strong, economic times for this state. We're not always going to be in strong economic times. We need to be getting as much money as possible right now, and we probably need to do it by not antagonizing the people who actually control the purse strings. And there is a good amount of money on the table for these schools this year, and maybe the equation here is let's focus on that and not the $1 billion on vouchers.
Of course, the other side of it is, well, do we take the money in the short term and then, according to them, allow vouchers to pass, which will in the long term hurt our schools and our school districts? And that seems to be the decision that they've made. Like, we need this money so desperately right now that we are willing to sort of just be quiet, take the money, and we'll deal with the voucher stuff later. And I think they're also hoping that other people will fight that fight for them. I think even within the Democratic caucus, there's that feeling of like, well, it's going to pass anyway, so let's, get the victories that we can, and then there's like the three public education people, Talarico, Hosa, and John Bryant, just going to the mats. But even they were frustrated in that hearing. They were like, if you guys need the money,
Right.
then
Like,
you guys
fight
need to come
for
out and
it,
say
and,
it.
like,
We're
right.
not just going to be out here. Well, at least
Right.
Hosa said that we're not just going to be out here fighting if you guys aren't going to fight. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
James, what do you think about these town halls? Like, do you think lawmakers are worried about them, and do you think they should be worried
I
about
think they
them?
should be worried about them. I mean, I was very interested to see Cody Harris's town hall. I mean, I saw some videos of that one, and yeah, I mean, these are rural districts, and the messaging from the governor's team and from Republican leaders is like the polling works. The polling people in rural areas support that. The town halls showed that perhaps not everybody supports it, and that there's a very vocal group of people who don't support it. So I think that does sort of worry legislators. I mean, do I think they're going to change their mind? I don't think so. But it is starting to show some of those cracks. And I think we've talked about this before, but some of these new freshmen who are newly elected and say, yes, school choice, school choice. Well, it's easy to say yes, school choice when you don't have specifics. But then when you have a school superintendent or a school principal saying, I got to close 3 schools in the district and you're only going to have 1 school district or school in the district left, like it gets a lot tougher when you get the specifics.
Right. I think you can get kind of that like dome blindness. Like you're under, you're like, oh, the only thing that matters is like what's happening here and like trading votes and all that. And then you go back to your district and you're getting yelled at a town hall.
And like the person who like, does your laundry is like very upset, or,
right.
your
Or
dry cleaner is
in a
upset at you.
rural
Yeah.
area, like the superintendent, can be like a very powerful person, and
Right.
you're,
Or your friends and neighbors are mad at you.
Totally.
It does, it does make you think. So,
there's a little
Yeah.
more like logistics, as
but
it
the other
goes
thing
on.
too is that like some of these lawmakers could also add tweaks and amendments to the legislation that could, and I think they're probably looking to do that, that could assuage some of those concerns. So there's probably that. But it's awful to take the heat, obviously.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's a little bit of like, particularly, from some Democrats, also from some of the education activists, like just sort of a sense of like, this is going to happen. Like, let's just like find ways we can tweak the.
Yeah, but I think also there's just a lot of what these town halls are reflective of is the energy starting to reemerge in the Democratic or more moderate area of Texas politics, right?
Well, and those are rural Republican areas.
Yeah, and
So
I
let's not
mean,
leave that out.
exactly. When Trump was first elected in 2016, you saw that kind of, the Women's March, all this like people literally out in the streets, and we did not immediately see that this time, but we're starting to see that if I'm a Republican, I might worry a little bit about that, right? Because 2018 was not a great election year for them, and maybe there's some energy popping up. Maybe I want to get some bills out there that I can point to and say, yeah, you might not like school vouchers, but look at this, $5,000 raise we did for teachers. Look at these billions of dollars we put into public schools anyways.
Yeah, and the other thing that I don't want to like let pass before commenting is as the details come out, like what you're talking about, the detail about the prioritization that there is in the House versus the Senate, where there isn't a real prioritization, but a person or a family that makes $156,000 can still qualify for these school vouchers, and they're calling that a low-income family. I think that's going to rile a lot of people up, and people say like $156,000 is low income. Like it really kind of speaks to sort of the design of the bill.
Right.
And that does seem to be where the tension is, right? Like the thing they need to figure out the most in order to get this across the finish line is that.
And the Senate seems to think like it's fine. We want to offer it to everybody. Like that this is in fairness, it's universal. It's universal for everybody. And the House is being a little bit more like maybe more careful about those optics because they're getting lit up by their districts.
Hi, I asked for a brief update on vouchers, but that's okay. I just want the listeners to know I am fighting for them. I do want to jump ahead a little bit and talk about another big story from this week. We saw State Representative Brian Harrison. There was this committee meeting where things got pretty tense. He was sort of repeatedly pressing the Texas Water Development Board Chair, L'Oreal Stepney, about the role of race in state hiring practices. And this really sort of blew up. I mean, Stepney, who is Black, was visibly distraught, very upset, wiping tears from her eyes, while Harrison sort of continued to push on this issue. We saw a big outpouring of support for the board chair, Stepney, from Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Speaker Burrows. Harrison did not back down, said he felt like his questions were perfect.
That's a familiar word to describe things like that.
Yes, right.
Reminds me of another politician.
Yes. James, what did you make of? I mean, this seems like an outlier in terms of the kind of clash we typically see between an agency head and a lawmaker.
Yes, and I think there was calls from leaders. Speaker Burrows kind of called it out in terms of like being on a committee and the kind of decorum and respect that is expected. But I thought it was noteworthy that both Patrick and Abbott, who are no snowflakes on DEI, they're certainly no supporters of DEI. I think
it's Abbott's executive order that we're
they're
talking about.
Clear opponents
right.
of DEI. But they were saying that they didn't, for example, Abbott didn't say like this went overboard, but he did express sort of support for Stepney. And I think you have to read in between the lines. Now, the other thing for listeners is like Representative Harrison is one of like the most conservative social warrior that there is. And this is his pet issue.
Yeah, he's like a bomb thrower kind of.
And he's like, I'm going to be the DEI guy. I'm going to tackle
the DEI police
at every stage.
Yeah.
And the questioning was, I sort of see where what he's getting at, saying like, I didn't say anything specifically about her or that she was a DEI
Right. He was like threading this very fine needle.
Right. But the takeaway from it was very much sort of like, are you a DEI hire? Are you supporting DEI hires? Is DEI a part of your system? And I think because she's a person of color, also it sort of was putting her on the spot maybe unfairly, and people on the committee called it out. I mean, Representative Harrison obviously said he felt like the questioning was perfect, but seeing so many other lawmakers say, hey, this went too far, I think you've got to pause and think about that. And making an agency head cry who's served for 30 years and this has not happened to her, I think you've got to pause and think about that.
Yeah, Harrison is a really interesting example of, would you agree with me that it's fair to say that he's a bit of a backbencher in the House in terms of influence?
Yes.
He has still managed to, with this DEI push that he's doing, anti-DEI push that he's doing, have a lot of influence on state government. I mean, he's really up in some university leaders' heads.
Texas A&M?
Yeah. His alma mater. He, has, finds these emails or individual programs, starts tweeting about them, and it draws a response. It draws a response from the Board of Regents, at times the governor, and everything like that. It's a sort of like modern, something you see in DC, frankly, a lot. Someone who's maybe not necessarily like getting a lot of legislation through, but getting a ton of attention and actually being able to create some movement on things just by sort of activating a certain wing of the party on the internet by pointing to these things.
I mean, he's done this with like very specific. He's both suddenly dying. He's done this, I think, on like really like before the session, in the interim, like on very specific things. I like, where he's like posting on Twitter about, this is on, a policy on some agency's website, and then he's calling out the governor, telling his supporters to call out the governor. He's like calling in. And then the governor will sweep in and change things.
Right.
One thing that was different this time is that it wasn't on Twitter. It was face-to-face with a black woman in a position of power. And you kind of got to see how she was reacting to that and how it felt to her to be kind of receiving that line of attack.
Twitter isn't real life, as we say. And like Twitter, this agency head is clearly very busy giving the state like water.
On a really important issue.
And she's probably not on Twitter all the time listening to these things, but then you got to see exactly what you're saying, like the reaction when people say these things to you and to your face, and it's hurtful stuff.
Right.
I think I want to shout out Alejandro Martinez, our colleague, who I think did a really, really great job of saying this is sort of a build out of the atmosphere that we're in with diversity, equity, and inclusion, where politicians are targeting it. Folks like Representative Harrison scream from the rooftops, and then our higher officials then react and do something. And so it becomes a cycle. right? It becomes a cycle. And so this is the natural build out of that. And perhaps it's a moment not just to say that moment was bad, but also to think about the broader issue here.
But, I mean, this whole, yes, this is Representative Brian Harrison, sort of, this is his MO kind of, but he was citing and building on the momentum around Governor Abbott's executive order, removing DEI from state agencies. And, yes, like Governor Abbott stepped into the, board chair Stephanie's defense, basically saying like, she's the best expert we have on water on this like hugely important issue.
But it is like that meme. It's like, who would do this?
Right. The underlying thing is that, I think Governor Abbott has certainly empowered this crusade of Brian Harrison's through this executive order. And, I think we're probably just going to see more clashes like this. I think, my sense, at least on Twitter, again, Twitter is not real life, but Governor Abbott has been much more assertive and vocal on Twitter on like a range of issues. And, I think that comes from the very, very top, right? We're seeing, President Trump is sort of engendering a lot of that rhetoric. And so I think Governor Abbott stepping in to say, like, in this case, that was maybe too far, even if you wouldn't use those words, is something. But, the underlying, I don't think we're going to anticipate Brian Harrison being sort of chagrined by that. Yeah. Matthew, what the hell is happening at the lottery?
That is an excellent question. So this is like, this feels like just like a fun old school.
It really
scandal.
does. I'm like,
this is like a J-root baby right here.
Yeah. It really is like one of those things that you're like, it feels like a heist movie.
Yeah.
That now the Texas legislature has to get involved in. And I think we should, every session, get one little treat story like this.
So the background here is that we have this concept of lottery couriers, which is basically you can go on to an app. You can be anywhere, I guess anywhere in the world, not just in the US, and buy a lottery ticket, and someone will go buy the ticket for you and take a picture of it for you. And then, I guess if it wins, they will either go collect the money for you and send it to you, or mail the ticket to you wherever you are. And so,
and this is one of those things that until we find out about what happens next, you think like, who is that? Who's that desperate to play the lottery that they're like, I need someone to do this third hand for me? But you're kind of like, seems inoffensive,
especially because they don't even let me pay for my like tickets with a credit card. Like I have to pay them with cash. So then I hear about this.
Yeah.
Are you a lottery player, James?
Not anymore.
Okay.
When it gets big.
Yeah.
I buy lottery tickets and put them in my children and wife's stocking every Christmas. So I'm a once a year.
And you're like, and that's Christmas
player.
in the Watkins household.
and
make your own luck.
That's right.
Okay, let's keep it moving.
All right. So anyways, lottery couriers. So what has happened though is that there was this particular situation, the Houston Chronicle wrote a great story about this, where essentially some folks found that they could game the system. And there are times where you can essentially buy a massive volume of tickets in order to essentially like work the odds. And, I think like practically like sort of guarantee that you're going to win something.
Right. In one of them, they bought every single number.
Yeah, exactly.
Or every single combination of numbers.
And so this has now raised concern. There's this one place, a store called Winner's Corner in Austin, that in 2022 sold $89 million worth of lottery tickets, which is about $83 million more in lottery tickets than the second highest
anywhere else.
And so Dan Patrick, this has come up a little bit. The Chronicle has done some good reporting on this. The Sunset Commission wrote a report on this in the state, leading Dan Patrick to show up to Winner's Corner again on Twitter. With it making a video kind of talking to the folks, seeing what he described as sort of a massive number of these lotto machines, which I can tell you from a Christmas buyer are not very reliable and sometimes only come halfway torn up, so you can't even read the numbers.
Wow,
then your daughter is really upset on Christmas because she doesn't know whether she's gonna win the lottery or not.
Santa's complaints are reaching new levels.
But ultimately, this has led to the resignation resignation of one of the lottery commissioners. There is a lot of talk about possibly banning these couriers, other kinds of legislation.
There's a Ranger investigation.
There's a Texas Rangers investigation. Yes. So just a lot of concern about the lottery commission here, and whether it should even continue to exist. There are some lawmakers who would like to get rid of it entirely.
It's now a priority item for the lieutenant governor, and I think it's going to get heard in former Speaker Phelan's. A similar issue is going to get heard on former Speaker Phelan's committee. So it's moving.
Yeah, it's definitely moving. We should say Eric Dexheimer at the Houston Chronicle did a lot of this reporting initially, and we owe him our thanks because we love a little heist story.
And if there are any agents out there, Eleanor is looking to sell a screenplay.
Yeah,
on this
exactly.
well.
I'm like, I've got the wheels already turning. And I feel like Eric should get first bite at that. But it's a crazy story that is moving pretty quickly through the legislature. There's been this, the interesting thing of the Lottery Commission for a long time has said that they cannot regulate these couriers. Right. Now we can regulate these couriers. It's been a little,
Yeah, it's interesting that it's coming along at a time where there's also a big push to expand gambling in the state. Yeah. I think this probably doesn't do great for that cause.
One thing that I will point out is that the Sunset Commission had pointed out all these issues with the Lottery Commission. Like their last report, I think last year, was like, this is not going right. So I think lawmakers can sort of be upset and yelling and doing some investigative reporting on it, but these problems existed, and they existed under their watch.
Feels like a strong endorsement for, things are only a problem once the media gets involved. We create problems. No, but I do think, they shine a light on it. And it's one of those things that is like pretty shocking when you get into the details. Involves like Malta and some Brits and people. Yeah. Anyway, the screenplay writes itself is all I'm saying. One last thing to sort of throw up just to discuss before we, wrap this up. A lot is happening on the federal level that is trickling down into Texas. As always, we saw Vice President Vance was here this week at the border, along with Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton. We obviously saw the speech from President Trump in which immigration was front and center. Anything standing out to you on that we feel like is gonna, we've got a DOJ committee now. Definitely feels like Texas is following in some federal footsteps on that. I mean, even the DEI executive order. What's next in the Texas Trump love affair?
Well, encounters at the border are way down, right? I think there's maybe a little bit more concern about tariffs as we continue to go on the tariff coaster up and down. I actually think, though, it feels like maybe as the temperature has turned up in D.C., the temperature in Austin has kind of gone down a little bit. Maybe there's like a feeling of a less need to be like, we need to be the tip of the spear now that we have Donald Trump in the president's office. So I don't know. I mean, there's still a long session to go, and there's going to be a lot of social issues that come up in between now. But so far, I mean, it's like we're talking about school finance, we're talking about the Lottery Commission, we're talking about water and all those types of things that it seems like the craziness, the high temperature type stuff right now is happening elsewhere.
It's at a simmer a little bit here in Texas, yeah. Which, we would take a boring session, I think. I think all of us would be... at least Matthew and I would, for TV, you need the excitement.
Always, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, it's definitely, hopefully, a little bit more of a low key session. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. James, we want to thank you so much for your time at the helm of the Texas Tribcast.
Thank you so much. I'll miss you guys.
We'll miss you, James.
Yeah. You can find all of the episodes of the Tribcast on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. Even though James is leaving, we are continuing on. So do not, don't look away from YouTube or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Like, subscribe, share. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can reach us at tribcast@texastribune.org. Our producers are Rob Avila and Chris Svoboda. Our theme music is composed by Rob. And two of us will see you next week.